Let us pause for a moment in the wonder of silence as we prepare to hear and share. Amen. Well, here we are. We're told that it's the official last long weekend of summer. I see faces. The X is boasting that it's having the highest number of attendees that it's had in quite some years, and certainly prior to the pandemic. Children are excitedly, I think, getting ready to go back to school. The teachers probably less so. Did I say that? No. Let me rephrase that. Teachers also excited to go back to school, but maybe a little apprehensive, and rightfully so. Some people are considering closing the cottage, and some people will want to wait until the last minute possible. And then there are some of us who, we're back at work. We never left. Most people will be back in work in some form. And when we look around and we hear stats and we hear news reports about people and work, truly, people have taken on a new modus operandi when it comes to work. COVID has dealt an interesting blow or an interesting twist in turn for people and work. Some people have decided they work best at home, best by themselves. Some people realize that I can go in 2 days a week and maybe stay at home. This, of course, is very unsettling to managers and supervisors and business owners who want their staff in. But these are the changes. And it's about work. It's about how do we perceive our work? What do we do as, quote, workers or staff? I want you to think of your first job. Do you recall the criteria that was required? Do you remember any of the interview questions? Tell me about yourself. Tell me a time when. Explain how. Look at this case study. Think for a quick moment. The bottom line is that the employer wants to get this prospective employee to be a perfect fit. Is he a self-starter? Can she be creative? It's all about criteria. The person gets the job. They're all excited. And they realize all of a sudden that they forgot to read the fine print where it says, "and other task as assigned." And their 8-hour days suddenly has gone up to 13 hours. Now, I think that this week's gospel is one of those relating to criteria. I have to tell you, and I think that many people who are giving sermons today had to really scratch our heads and think about our readings. I loved the Jeremiah reading, at least the first couple of verses, before it goes into God's wrath. I just imagine, can you imagine the potter? Anybody here know of a potter? Have you seen them work? Isn't it amazing? They just patiently do this. And out of a lump of clay, they make something absolutely amazing and colorful and in many ways useful. Then I thought of the psalm, and I love that psalm. It reminds me of a biology lesson in some regards, as well as a bit of psychology. I love the verse that says, I am wonderfully or marvelously made. And I encourage you, just look at yourselves. Do you not consider yourselves an amazing work of creation or art? The way our hands move, our legs move. God has done a great work. And then came the gospel. I scratched my head and I thought, maybe I'll do Jeremiah instead. And then I thought at the end, there's some pretty wrathful stuff. So I didn't want to go that heavy route on such a long weekend. And then the psalm, oh, how the psalm, you know that I love psalms, touched me. But I felt still being called to that text, the gospel. And I'll tell you why I feel called to that. Because it's difficult. It's sometime that we see Jesus and we don't expect him to say that. So I decided that I was going to gird my loins, so to speak, and I was going to face this difficult text. And I'll tell you something else. I realized that if I was having difficulty with it, you too were probably having difficulty with it. Our Luke passage seems to go against our core message of Jesus. Loving self, loving your neighbors, taking care of each other. I was so surprised at this text that I read it 4 times straight. And I'm thinking, am I missing something? And then I went to a book that I often jump to when I'm really confused about something that Jesus said. And the book is called, Why Would Jesus Say That? To my great surprise, the Why Did Jesus Say That did not have this text in it. Jesus' language makes me feel uncomfortable. And if I'm judging by the 8:30 service this morning, it makes many of you feel uncomfortable also. Jesus' language is so extreme. And this is not the type of language that we use in mainline churches. It deals with sacrificing, counting the loss, bearing our cross. We leave those types of themes up to other churches. Let's look at sequence. In that sequence, we have Jesus previously talking about a rich man. He has thrown a huge party. Everyone that he invited came up with a reason not to attend. Can you imagine? He then sends his servants out and brings in everybody who he knows nothing about to this feast. And they rejoice, and he is concerned. Those people, I suspect, are many of the people that leave and they've heard of Jesus, and suddenly our text opens, there was a large crowd. Let's face it, crowds increase as momentum goes up. I remember, I don't know about some of you, but I remember when I was younger, and I was raised in a family that was very community-oriented in the sense of helping. And as I got older, I was more prone to do and focus on things like social justice. So when I would see a group of people who were singing and chanting and marching, I would just quickly check in about what they were out, and I would join them for the cause. And I suspect that this may have happened with this group of people with Jesus. They saw a crowd. Some of them decided, I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to hear what this man says. I've heard a lot about him. I realized that when I joined these groups and when the march was over, there were certain things they required of me. They wanted me to tell someone else. They wanted to keep the group in the public eye. And then they considered next steps. What would I do? And this is how I see this story. I see this story as Jesus looking at this group of some people who may have believed, some people who were questioning, some people who were absolute doubters, some people who were trying to figure out who Jesus was because they had heard of his teachings, heard that he had healed people, they were just wondering, just as we would today. The verse with hate in it. Hate, reflecting a huge cross-section of society, including the convinced and the converted. In our reading of the 8 verses of our gospel reading, it is the second one that grasps our attention and shocks us. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Have we not been told to enjoy life and love life? Aghast, I went and I thought, there's got to be another way of looking at this. So I went to my copy of the Message, which read, anyone who comes to me but refuses to let go of father, mother, spouse, children, brothers, sisters, yes, even oneself, cannot be my disciple. I thought, not much better. This is hyperbole. This hyperbolic language of Jesus shocks us. This type of exaggeration is clear when we compare Luke's gospel to that of Matthew. And Matthew says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Although they both use exactly the same documents, Luke has decided to use the sharper language of hate, not as we know hate, but hate as in allegiance. I am then going to propose that hate here does not mean the absence of love, but that Jesus is alluding to the consequences, contradictions, and the challenges that occur when one follows him. You see, Jesus established a stringent criteria for discipleship. I'm just going to use this analogy. When any group leader or a group suddenly realizes that they have way too many people for their select group, they decide to set up criteria. Make it a little difficult for some people to get in. That possibly was what Jesus was thinking. He knew that there would be some people who followed him half-heartedly, some people who would not accept his teachings as total. These ideas perhaps went through his mind. And in the background of that, we realize that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Now, because of how our readings appear, and it is not as if it's Palm Sunday and leading up to that, we forget that Jesus is already on a journey and these people are following with him. He is aware that when persecution comes, when people ask, are you a follower of Jesus, as we saw in Peter, that people will say no. So he's saying to them, if you can't do this now, you will not be able to contend and put up with opposition. Were the masses ready for the test? This was a different level from the original disciples who were just told to follow him. This is single-minded and intentional. This verse reminds us about the character of our Christian lives. It's how we live. It's not just how we think. Jesus simply wanted loyalty. And that's what he asks us of today. That's it. Hate, not the opposite of love, but simply following an allegiance to. And as we're called to follow Jesus and adhere to his teachings, we are committed to a better world, regardless of all the distractions around us. And so we press on the basic and core values that Jesus taught us, to simply love. Love one another. Amen.